That's just not the case in terms of how the market, works when it comes to media execution, reach, and driving performance. There's room for multiple partners, and that's the cool part of RTB House, is that we don't sell it quite as much as a competitive solution. We sell it as an additive complementary platform to what a marketer is doing. Deep learning is essentially a more powerful version. It's a subset of machine learning. But the most important thing is we got to prove that it's incremental. If we can prove that we're incremental on top of another partner, then there's value.
Most e-commerce brands think their retargeting is handled. They're running Criteo or Performance Max, hitting their ROAS targets and moving on. But here's the problem. Their platform is only reaching 15 to 20% of the visitors who bounce from their site. The other 80 to 85% never see their brand again. In this episode of Inside the Blurb, I sit down with Jason Blom, VP of Strategic Opportunities at RTB House and former Criteo sales leader, to break down what deep learning retargeting actually does differently and whether adding a second retargeting partner is worth it. Jason Blom, welcome to the MarTech Matrix Inside the Blurb. How are you?
Doing great. Good to see you.
I am stoked to have you on the show. It's not often we have a salesperson on the show, no less a friend. So I do consider you one of my best friends, but you have had some great experiences, and now that you're at RTB House, I think that you can provide a lot of insights to the audience about not just what RTB House is doing, but how they're doing it and how it's different than what maybe people are used to or think they know about the company, right? Let's take away some misunderstandings if we can. But I want to start with you, because I've always wondered how somebody can work for Criteo and then go work for a Criteo competitor. Because when we were at Criteo together, we believed Criteo was the best, and I think it was the best at the time. And then I know you did something in between, but you ended up at RTB House, a major competitor to Criteo, which most people hadn't even heard of at the time. Talk to me about that journey, like what that thought process was about, like, okay, can I do this? Or here's why I should do it. Was there a lot of conviction? Talk to me about that thought process.
Well, first off, I blame you for the initial decision to join RTB House, because you were the one that hired me at Criteo, going back 13, 14 years ago. So you're the primary reason how I got into this job. But the decision with RTB House was it wasn't a short one. It wasn't by accident. It wasn't anything that wasn't well thought through. And when I started at Criteo back in 2013, 2014, to your point, we were definitely the powerhouse in the lower funnel. I would say performance display, performance DSP space. And I would say in 2016, RTB House started to peak up on my radar, given the fact that they had some international success with regard to LATAM and APAC, and certainly in EMEA, where the company is based in Poland. And I was at Criteo for another almost 5 years, in some way, shape, or form, competing, albeit very, very lightly, with RTB House. So the awareness was there. I didn't join the company until 2023, so it was almost a 7-year kind of evaluation of the company. But the real story is I had met with the founders or a part of the founding team, going back to 2017. A lot of the folks that built the RTB House business were former Criteos. And so those folks, I was always able to get a little bit of information in terms of how is the company kind of evolving. And so there was multiple discussions, prior to me joining in 2023. But I think the most important ones were actually, really having a good understanding under the hood. So I had friends that joined the organization that were selling the technology or were using the technology to measure effectiveness, media effectiveness. And I also had friends that that were marketers that had started to use the technology. And so I was able to have discussions with them around their experiences with RTB House. So when you leverage kind of, all of my discussions with the founding, teams, friends that had experiences selling the technology, and then marketers, and their experiences working with the technology. It was a pretty easy decision to join the organization in 2023, knowing that the technology worked and it was complementary to what Criteo and others were doing in the lower funnel performance DSP space. So it made a lot of sense. So
Was there a point in time where you're like, okay, this technology that what they're doing, I mean, they're both doing retargeting at the time, but was there a point at which you realized or thought, wow, this is different? It's the same output, and this, in terms of like how we classify it, but it's just fundamentally different about how they go about the business. Talk me through that and what you saw.
yeah, I mean, I think once I started to see the roster of clients that they were building in the US, and I knew how complicated those businesses were. I mean, you're talking about enterprise retailers, large direct consumer brands that were leveraging RTB House. That was the moment at which I realized it was real. That this technology isn't smoke and mirrors. It wasn't some type of salesmanship that was relationship driven. It was actual technology that was working. So that was, I would say, the early parts of the pandemic when like digital was hot and ecom was really pumping, and you had clients or prospects or retailers or brands that were looking for new solutions to help them drive business. RTB House started their really fast ascent towards success in the early part, and that was the moment. That's when I realized, and that's when I started to ask more questions about: is the company legit? Should I join it? Does the technology work?
Yeah. So what's the hardest part about selling against Criteo, right? I mean, we always joked about there were some people that left Criteo when we were there in the early days who maybe left on their own, maybe didn't, and then went to work for a competitor who we all know was an inferior company to Criteo at the time. And we used to just make jokes about it, right? But what's the hardest part about selling? I mean, I get you truly believe that this technology is better. So I get that makes it a little bit easier to do to make that jump. But what does it feel like selling against Criteo?
I think it's kind of the natural evolution of technology. I mean, you look back at, I mean, you worked at Yahoo and you sold some type of media products there. There's always going to be an evolution in terms of business and new technologies that take existing technologies and improve them. I think when we were selling Criteo, we were taught that the mindset was there was only room for one retargeter, one lower funnel DSP. And we were taught that and we believed that. And as a result, it was almost a religious kind of, feeling in terms of how we approached sales and how we actually ran those businesses. That's just not the case in terms of how the market, works when it comes to media execution reach and driving performance. There's room for multiple partners, and so the way that I approach it with Criteo is it's very factual, and it's highlighting strengths that I have as a technology solution with RTB House, and certainly having a good understanding of what Criteo's role or Google's role or Meta's role or other solutions that are selling some type of display product. So I think it's relatively easy when you kind of think about the way that we complement what Criteo might be doing. Then it's not necessarily competitive, and that's the cool part of RTB House, is that we don't sell it quite as much as a competitive solution. We sell it as an additive complementary platform to what a marketer is doing. And if we outperform, then it's a budget conversation, which is invest more into the platform versus let's knock out a competitor. And so that's how we approach the conversation. That's my mindset with my team and how I have those conversations with marketers. So it becomes easy. It becomes a much easier conversation because you're not trying to compete. You're trying to actually understand what marketers are trying to do in order to grow their business and help them accomplish those objectives.
Yeah, I mean that's totally fair. I think when I think back to those other people we were talking about, I think back then they weren't even close to Criteo's tech and the value they added, and they were just left to find negatives, right, and sell against Criteo for anything they could find that wasn't really real. So I appreciate that approach because I think that's fair. We're not bad mouthing our old employer, which we love. Um, so in between Criteo and RTB House, you went to a company called Shopkick, and Shopkick's more like in-store engagement, right? So it's very different, right? So you're talking about in-store engagement versus retargeting. But did that experience in between teach you anything that sort of led you back to retargeting, or what did you take away from that experience?
It so it's funny. If you go back and look at my LinkedIn, I started out in retail. I mean, when I was in college, I was in retail. After college, I worked for a wholesaler and sold into retail. The Shopkick experience was great, actually. It kind of reminded me of what retailers and brands really care about. And to kind of expand on that, yes, it was in-store engagement, but think about shopper marketing. And that's really, what the foundation of Shopkick was about, was taking shopper marketer dollars and helping take digital experiences and drive to in-store outcomes, which is promote some type of brand's products within a digital experience so you can get them into store. And the fascinating part of shopper marketing is, it really comes down to how do you get a consumer to buy a product, of course, but become interested in new products, because that's the hard part for a lot of brands as they're introducing new products to market. How do they get shelf space? How do they get a consumer to the shelf in order to sample their product or just buy a brand new product for the first time? So it was really cool, actually, to kind of revisit a lot of my retail roots in terms of understanding those core kind of foundational things around retail, which is getting people to a shelf, getting people to buy products, getting people to be a loyal customer. And so that's where Shopkick and some of the kind of things that solution was strong at. It really helped me kind of think about how I might go to market for performance display. There's a lot of similarities there with regard to bringing people back to a website so that they can buy products. And how do you think about shelf space within a digital experience? And so, I mean, then also, how do you think about putting products into creative? There's a lot of similarities there, and so having that experience was pretty cool to kind of think about a new way
Yeah.
this business.
I think that's interesting. I think it's good advice. I'll extract the advice from that for other salespeople. Is we very easily get immersed in what we're doing every day, right? And we live and breathe and we bleed and all we talk about. We think we're the center of the universe when it comes to the products that we sell to the marketers. And in reality, is customers are everyone's unique, right? People buy, shop, get convinced, learn differently. And we aren't the center. We're a piece of the puzzle. No matter what you're selling, you're just a piece of the puzzle. And it's important to understand that consumer journey so you can explain where you fit in. And I think, you going to Shopkick and seeing like, hey, people might click on a retargeting ad, but they also might go into a store and they might look at what's on a shelf and they might be persuaded to buy something different. And I think that can really give you a different perspective. I would imagine you talk about retargeting differently at RTB House than you did at Criteo, just simply based off that experience. And I would
Oh yeah,
encourage everyone to do
yeah.
that.
I think the consumer journey, the path to conversion. I mean, those are definitely different types of talk tracks now versus when you and I were selling Criteo, many years ago.
Yeah. So let's switch to the product a little bit and try and create some education around the space. We don't like buzzwords here, but I know that you guys talk a lot about machine learning versus deep learning and deep learning in AI. So can you help us understand, what the differences are as it relates to what RTB House does and if there was an evolution there and what the benefits of those different technologies are?
Yeah, I mean, I think let's just start with what does deep learning mean? And um, I think machine learning, if you've been in some type of digital marketing, you understand machine learning. It's basically the foundational backbone for how most technologies do some type of automated decisioning, right? It's what Google and Meta and Criteo and many others have used for automated programmatic buying or dynamic creative optimization or product recommendation. And that goes back, many years, so we're probably talking 20 years now of some type of machine learning algorithms that have been in use. Deep learning is essentially a more powerful version. It's a subset of machine learning. And really all it is taking more processing power. So you talk about agentic AI and a lot of the buzzwords that have been going around over the last 3 to 4 years, as Chat GPT or GPT is really come onto the scene. And it's funny, you and I were talking earlier about, how do you prepare for and or get work done more efficiently? AI is how you do it. It's the way you cut down time. But deep learning is really, it's more processing power. And the way that we operate as a business is we, collect more first party data than any other platform that is doing some type of personalization or performance display advertising. We have more pixels that are on a website that collects more data. We're processing more of those first party signals at a quicker rate. And the reason for it is that we want to create more efficiency and higher incrementality with regard to the media spend. So if somebody's investing with RTB House, we want to drive better performance. So, without getting into all the buzzwords and all the detail of it, it's really just a more advanced, higher processing power that we leverage in order to drive sort of the back end performance of the system. So now the output is the interesting part, because when you look at how you set up programmatic campaigns, whether it's in a kind of a standard self-service DSP, whether it's a DB360 or the Trade Desk or Yahoo, Amazon, those are rules based. You actually have to curate an audience. You have to create a deal ID and select a PMP. You have to, bolt on a creative strategy. You have to manually create your campaign and then execute it based on frequency and based on day parting and based on actually setting CPMs. That's a very inefficient way to run performance campaigns. And if anything, you just don't typically see any type of good ROAS performance when you're operating in those ecosystems. Criteo is good at what they do, and they drive ROAS and performance. But I think that where we see benefit is on being able to use the processing power to actually drive incremental performance. How do you actually drive higher conversion rates? How do you drive higher cart values? How does that translate into AOV? And then ultimately, how do you convert more visitors and shoppers to buyers? And you don't need to do that at massively increased rates. You just need a 0.5% increase in conversion rate and a higher AOV, and or turning maybe a first-time purchaser into a second-time purchaser. All those kind of things combined helps you produce incrementality. So that's the output of the deep learning, is making sure that processing power and that automation is helping you do better programmatic decisioning to drive better performance.
All right, I want to dip into the weeds just a little bit. When we were at Criteo, we would often, I think we found the best way to pitch and help a marketer understand what we did was to show them how the engine, if you will, thought about making decisions, where it got its information from, the path to that decision process. So we used to actually whiteboard that out. So today, how would you explain the differences? I mean, let's take you, Criteo, RTB House, Criteo, and Google. How does each of them bid differently than the other? that differentiates from each other?
So I think what happens with a traditional performance DSP, so with a Criteo or a Google, they're the masters of identification of an in-market, I would say, customer, meaning they've hit a website, a retailer, they've looked at multiple pages, they've carted a product. You can identify, what that product looks like. They have an ecosystem that connects into SSPs or direct publisher relationships. They're getting those impressions out there, as soon as somebody bounces off site. And that's a well-oiled machine that's been there for years and years and years. Now the challenge with that, though, is that their systems are because they're not as sophisticated in terms of identification of sort of the complex path to purchase. Like, did somebody actually put a product into their favorites? What is the frequency of the actual visit to a website? What ends up happening is they tend to their impression dispersion after somebody bounces off site and they're retargeting them. It's all right after they bounced off site. So they're doing a good job of getting somebody to come back to the site, but then they stop the impression delivery. And so our technology is really designed to yield manage the media delivery to the consumer, so that we're not stopping the impression delivery after hours, but let's extend it, elongate it to days. And then there's other factors like product recommendation, making sure that you're not just displaying the same product over and over that somebody's viewed or carted. There's a reason why they bounced off site, and it's likely because they didn't find what they were looking for. So you have to show them a good set of product recommendations that maybe they didn't look at, and maybe it's a different color, or maybe if it's a different style of maybe a dress or a shoe or a different offer, if it's a non-retail client. So that's a big part of it, is using the AI, not just in media execution, which is, okay, are you targeting them 2 or 3 days after? But then also, what are you showing them? And for me, it's it's really those little details, those little nuances that make a difference. And then our creative solution is it's not your standard kind of ugly ads that I would say retargeting has a bad reputation of. We really try and make them engaging. And so if we can incorporate better, I would say, frequency and the like, how are we actually targeting the consumer with better product recommendation, with better ad look and feel, then you see performance. With Criteo, with Google, those systems haven't changed much in 10 years. And as a result, it's kind of the same level of performance that you're seeing with them, whereas we've been able to advance it with some of our technology and the way that we approach the market. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, it does. But I'm going to go outside the blurb for a second and sort of throw this back at you. With all of the AGI, all the AI that's out there, and we're starting to see it, I think most in the largest way, hit marketing teams, at least in our industry, where they're using these tools to really help them do their planning, do their execution, do their analysis, their optimization. I would think that these other solutions are going to get more into, hey, how do we leverage AI to understand the consumer better and make better decisions than we are today, right? Layering in that AI piece. That sounds very similar to what you just described. Do you have a take on where performance marketing is going when you layer in AI? I haven't talked to you about this. I'm just curious if you thought about that.
Well, I mean, I think more and more the feedback loops that are driving the AI decisioning and the performance outcomes, they're getting better and better. I mean, I'll give you an example. Think back to 10 years ago, what measurement looked like, and measurement was extremely last click. It was based on very, very few kind of inputs And it was really hard for marketers to understand, what channels were actually driving the best performance, not only from a kind of a ROAS standpoint, but from an LTV kind of new customer. Those systems have really, really advanced over the last, 10 years. And there's a lot of new, cool AI-driven measurement technologies that are helping these marketers better understand the balance of digital media spend, not just across the performance DSP landscape, but also how do you leverage offline signal? How do you leverage, Google search, branded, search or brand search, social? How does that get incorporated in there? And then there's going to be new channels, whether it's, the AI platforms themselves, or influencer over the last several years. So the measurement ecosystem is really, really advanced. And so I think for me, that's probably the next evolution of where AI and the sort of the value is. It's going to help these marketers with regard to how they manage their media spend and identify the channels that are actually driving the most value. So that would be, my take on it. I know, at least from my experience at RTB House, our channel is definitely seeing more interest because there's better measurement, that is being deployed against it. So that's definitely an upside for lower funnel for performance display. Historically, when we were measured in a last click world, we just weren't seeing nearly the same level of value. So this is for me, this is the benefit of AI.
Yeah, sure. I mean, standardized marketing 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago was all about, reach and frequency. But in digital, it's like if you have any, any frequency, it's like, oh, it's not working. The conversion rates are too low. It's like, it doesn't work that way. And if anything, the ads are smaller and they're integrated into the content more so than a commercial. All right, I want to go back to something you said earlier before we went off on a tangent there. And you talked about identifying products that maybe the user didn't buy. And in your sales and marketing material that I read through, it said something like 61% of purchased products were never previously viewed by the shopper. And I know we used to say the same thing at Criteo or something similar. I don't remember what the percentage was, but I think for most people that's counterintuitive to retargeting. If I'm brown shoes, I want brown shoes, I want those brown shoes, and you show me blue shoes and I buy the blue shoes. How do you go about, like, how does the tech think through that and figure out what products they should recommend to somebody that leads to that kind of a conversion?
I mean, again, as I mentioned, it's funny, you look at just kind of the raw stats of how an e-commerce business works. I mean, the site conversion is so low. It's 2%, it's 3% in terms of somebody that's actually visiting a site to actually purchasing. The problem is you have so many. It's not just is the consumer interested in buying the product that they're looking at or that they've carted, but then there's the competitors that they have to, you say you're Nike. You're not just competing with, Nike. You got to go to Amazon. You got to compete with Amazon. You got to compete with all these other retailers. The whole point of product recommendation, the whole point of making sure that you are incorporating reco is that the consumer isn't interested in buying the product. They may have carted it, but maybe they didn't find the right deal. Maybe they're shopping other platforms. Maybe they actually don't really know what they want. And so what you need to do is, you need to engage them with advertising so that you can bring them back. And then you need to actually have a good assortment of offer and product recommendations that are things that they haven't seen before, because there's just so many things that they can shop for. And ultimately what you want to do is find the right combination of timing and offer or product recommendation that's going to get the consumer to re-engage. It's not necessarily linear in most cases, meaning the consumer isn't just going to a website and then bouncing off the website. They see an ad and then they come back and buy it. it takes multiple visits in some cases to get them to come back. And so you have to constantly be in front of them with some type of advertising and product recommendation. So really, our technology is designed to kind of, in real time, leveraging AI, test those offer and product recommendations that are going to get the consumer to engage. And given the fact that we have, first party data on all of the consumers' engagements, we can actually cycle through and test in real time. Are there different product assortments? Is there a new product that's been introduced to the website that can bring a consumer back? Is there something that's on sale? Is there a different color, to your point on the example? Is there a different brown shoe that might make sense to display to them? Or why don't we show them a red shoe and maybe that's exciting to them? But you got to test that in real time. And then as you mentioned, we see, greater than 60% of the engagements happen, meaning a click happens on a product that wasn't viewed before or carded. And about 60% of the sales happen on non-viewed products. So that's pretty cool. And that tells us that the consumers are fickle and you got to make sure you're showing them, new stuff all the time in order to get them to engage and ultimately buy.
Yeah, I think it's a consumer behavior understanding, right? I think when somebody walks into a store, they can see all your products on this. You're looking at sneakers, right? You see the wall; they're all right there, right? And you can, if you were there looking for a pair of basketball sneakers, you look at the basketball shoes and you pick your selection. But if you're going online, at least for me personally, I know I want a pair of green and white Nike Air Force Ones. I want a pair of green and white Air. That's what I'm going to go search for, and I'm going to gravitate toward. I may not realize that there's another Nike that's green and white. Maybe it's not an Air Force One that I might like better. Retargeting might show that to me, but I would never have looked for it. It might not have showed up on the page. So I think it's a very different experience, and I think marketers need to fully understand the consumer behavior. Okay, so I want to talk about the idea of running multiple retargeters. I know you touched on this earlier, and I know how we felt about it at Criteo. And I always had some clients, some large clients would say, we're running two and we're seeing the lift. And they can never explain to me how they were seeing that incremental performance, if you will, or incremental sales, different than incrementality. So if a brand is running Criteo right now and they're hitting their ROAS targets, what's the honest case for why they should try adding a second retargeting partner? Not saying replace Criteo, but add RTB House to the mix. And how do you alleviate their concerns that they're cannibalizing their Criteo spend?
So the honest truth in all of this, and this applies to RTB House as well, is that there is no one platform that has 100% reach on an eligible audience. And the example I like to use is, say you're a brand and you have a million people that are hitting your website in any given period. I don't care if you're Google or Criteo or Meta or RTB House, you'll never be able to achieve 100% reach rate, meaning getting an impression in front of every single one of those people that bounced off your site. And the reason why is there's budget limitations and constraints. And then, the world that we live in, most of these campaigns are managed on a ROAS. And you just can't, the performance constraints just won't allow you to invest as much into getting those impressions out there. So what that means is that the reach rates for most solutions land at around 15%, maybe 20 max, in terms of that eligible audience. So think about it, 1 million people, only 15 to 20% actually ever see impressions from a given solution. Now, that doesn't mean that you want to serve impressions to every single person, but you definitely want to maximize your reach rate. And so the value proposition of RTB House is that we're a separate technology bidder AI that has the ability to reach more of those eligible visitors. So we want to take those reach rates from 15 to 20% to 25, 30, 35, 40%. and maximize the reach on those visitors and potential shoppers and buyers so that we can get more business. That's the additive nature of the platform. So I would say, that's, first and foremost, the way that we address hey, why is two better than one? The overlap is there, and that's always going to be there. It doesn't matter whether or not it's Google and Meta or Criteo and RTB House or RTB House and Google or whatever combination of performance platforms that are in the stack. There's always going to be an inherent overlap of the targeting, meaning two platforms are targeting the same customer with ads. But if you can have two different platforms, one that is targeting the consumer with high impression frequency right when they bounce, and then you have RTB House that's elongating targeting windows, then there is an additive nature. And our overlap rates, they range anywhere from 5 to 20% in terms of, we are actually targeting the same consumer. But at the end of the day, Sean, the most important metric is, can you prove incrementality? And that's really what this comes down to with the vast majority of our customers, the ones that have been working with us for years. They understand that there's going to be overlap, and they're willing to accept that as long as the general look and feel of the user experience is there's continuity there. But the most important thing is we got to prove that it's incremental. If we can prove that we're incremental on top of another partner, then there's value. And that's really when you talk about the clients that have been working with us for years, that's what they do. They challenge us on measuring incrementality.
So what I heard there was that a brand a decent sized brand could realistically work with Criteo, work with RTB House, work with Meta, and maybe even one other channel or partner in the retargeting space. And in theory, not have any overlap. In practice, there's certainly going to be overlap. So then it comes back to incrementality. Take us through, let's say I'm a brand and I'm working with Criteo, RTB House as a test, and Meta. I think that's probably a pretty common setup. How do I set up an incrementality test cleanly to get a good read on the value each channel is bringing? And I think the complication there is, I'm going to point this out, is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Criteo delivers ads on Meta, RTB House doesn't, or do you now?
Correct. Yeah, we don't do any ads on Meta. So to your scenario there, the assumption is that you've already run incrementality tests as a brand with Criteo and Meta, and you have a baseline for what is your ROAS that you would expect out of any given platform. So that would be first and foremost. Is there is some understanding of what your lift rates are, what does your ROAS look like, and whether or not that's been done by your own internal measurement systems, or maybe you're leveraging a third party to do it. We want to be able to complement what you're doing there when it comes to incrementality. The second thing, so to bring us in, we typically recommend pretty conservative. We're not expecting to be added into a performance stack in an aggressive way. So if you're spending, $100,000 a month with a given platform, could be Criteo, could be Google, could be Meta. Start conservatively. Maybe it's 20 to 30% of that budget, and then bring us in. Let us prove that we can hit the attributed metrics, and typically that takes no more than 30 to 60 days for us to hit those attributed last click, post click, view-based attributed metrics. And then we deploy our incrementality test within the first 90 days. So typically it starts after about 60 days. And then we process kind of a standard, what we call ghost ads, but it's a standard test and control, exposed, unexposed population. And the idea is that we want to be able to measure whether or not there's conversion lift, there's revenue lift between the exposed and unexposed populations. Typically, we can accomplish that within 90 days. Start conservative, and then hit the attributed metrics, and then run the incrementality test. And that typically takes time.
How do you, if you're running the incrementality test, how do you ensure that a user, I get you're serving a ghost ad, but how does you ensure that user is not seeing an ad from Criteo, or that doesn't matter? Does that actually
Doesn't matter. Yeah, I
help
mean,
the test?
yeah, the idea behind the incrementality test is that you have a baseline for performance with your existing partners. And again, whether it's Criteo or Google or Meta or whoever, there's baselines there, and you're happy with the performance, and then you add us in, and then you see if there's lift beyond what your baselines are. So that's, again, it doesn't matter what's happening with the existing partner side.
So I want to ask you for some examples of where this has been successful. But before we do, just so someone understands if they're thinking about this, what does it look like to get started? I mean, I assume that they're already working with a Criteo. Is the process the same? Like, take us through how quickly you can get live and what resources someone needs, because I think that's probably always the slowdown, right?
It's relatively simple from a integration standpoint. It's typically a JavaScript pixel that we leverage. Good news is Google didn't destroy the cookie, so we still have access to JavaScript pixels. We pixel the website. Now the key difference between RTB House and Criteo and any other DSP for that matter is we actually collect more first party data. So that does pose some challenges in terms of making sure that the integration is perfect, or that the integrity is good enough to run a test, the way that we expect to run it. A product feed is sort of the second piece, and that's standard protocols with pretty much any performance solution now. So whether or not it's a Google feed or it's a product feed that's coming through Feedonomics or some other partner, we accept that. And then the creative, we do build the creative, so similar to how Criteo might operate, or Meta, or even Google, Performance Max. We build the creative on our side. Now the key difference for us is we collect more assets. So if there's video assets, we like to combine video with product recommendation as much as we possibly can. And then, any type of branding assets. We want to create static, if they're static images, we want to blend that in with product recommendation. Again, the idea is we want to up level the creative experience. And if we can do it, then we'll use as many of the assets and as much of the content as we can.
Great. Yeah, we'll talk about creative a little bit too in a second. But you say you collect more first party data. Can you elaborate on that? Like, what do you mean? So you put it, is it how you pixel the site? Talk to us about like what you're collecting that maybe a Criteo is not collecting.
Yeah, the standard, when you look at retargeting, the standard pixels are homepage, search results page, an actual PDP, cart, and then conversion, right? So it's kind of 5 standard pixels, but you're leaving out a lot of really rich data, that's in there. And some of that could be things like, email landing pages. It could be favorites. It could be other, could be a blog. It could be other content that's on a given brand or retailer's website. So we want to collect as many of those other web page events as we possibly can, so that we can create a better picture for the AI of what that user's experience is with that website. And if we can take some of that data and then use it in the deep learning algorithm to create better decisioning, that's helpful. And really what it comes down to, Sean, is can you identify somebody that's more engaged, or is a super customer? And if you can, then those are good events to decision off of. The other thing is app. We leverage app a lot, and we don't want to just use, web and mobile web. We want to use the app signals as well to help our decisioning. And there's a lot of value in not only collecting data, but also driving consumer to app experiences as well. When you get into like standard DSPs, they don't leverage app at all. And then Criteo does, but in a more limited way. And then obviously Meta is primarily app. So they all kind of have their limitations because they're not really working as broadly across all the different channels.
Got it. So in your sales deck that I looked through, you talk about a handful of clients that you brought on in the way that you described earlier. You came on as a second player and added incremental value, but you eventually became the only partner they worked with. Take us through like what that process looks like, how you earn that trust, and the decision making on the client's part. Is it purely budgetary? Is it relationship driven? Is it performance driven? Like, how do they get to the decision? Like, because you said earlier, like you could realistically run both, so and have incremental ROAS. So what leads to them removing Criteo or Google or whoever the other partner is in favor of RTB House? And maybe give us the brand if you can.
Yeah, let's let's just be very direct. Performance dictates everything. So we've been fortunate, to your point, to have a lot of customers that have been with us for years and have made the decision to leverage us as their only lower funnel retargeting solution. But the way that we've gotten there is not just performance. Performance is the ultimate reason. But in some cases, it does go back to things like creative experience. Fact is most of these performance marketers, they roll up to a chief marketing officer, and those chief marketing officers really value the user experience. And if your lower funnel ads don't look good, then they're willing to sacrifice performance in some cases. And so that's a key driver. Service levels are crucial. Let's face it. You can expect that there will always be a problem in every single one of our campaigns. It's just the nature of marketing, and specifically digital marketing. It doesn't always work like a well-oiled machine, but you need to have somebody on the other end of the line to solve those problems. Or in some cases, we identify a problem and then inform our customers, hey, your website isn't functioning properly, or pixels are down, or your measurement isn't working correctly. So, the partnership is key, to building that trust. And if you can kind of solve for performance, and then you can solve for the gaps with, things like brand experience, and then you can create better service levels, that's the winning formula to creating partnership. And I think we've been very fortunate in that we've been able to do that pretty efficiently with our longstanding customers. And we're doing it more and more as we build our roster of new clients as well.
Excellent. So before we go into the rapid fire segment of the show, let's talk a little bit more about creative. So you mentioned it a couple of times. What is the sort of creative philosophy? Let's just pull it up to a high level at RTB House, because we know, and you've said this here, but we all know that retargeting ads have historically been ugly, right? They were like, product shots on a white background, 3-4 across, and and they did their job. And so there was never really a need to make it look better. But you hit on the point earlier about brand. So what is the company's philosophy on it? And where do you really stand out from the competition?
Well, I think you nailed it. At the end of the day, the most performative creative is the ones that have what I like to call high density product, meaning there's a lot of products in an ad, because then you can get more product reco in there, and those perform the best. You're typically going to see your highest conversion. But our philosophy is, how do you take that and make that look better? And the way that you do that is you, in many cases, overlay a static image, or you incorporate video into the carousel of how the creative kind of sequences, meaning there's a video and then that resolves and then you see product recommendation. So it's important to put in more elements, into the creative. You can't just show DPA. And I think Meta, honestly, they've done such a good job over the last however many years of blending video into a product carousel, into other potential static content. And I think our philosophy is, how do you do that? How do you blend that? How do you actually work with your customers in order to create the right kind of balance between, you got to show product reco, but you also need to show brand elements in there. And so we definitely templatize most of the creative, but we offer more templates that have branding moments and branding experience, so that it creates just better looking ads, and ads that ultimately engage the consumer. Because that's really what this is about. We need to get those consumers engaged as well, not just make sure that the CMOs are happy with the look and feel. So,
okay, rapid fire. Ready? Let's make them quick. Snap.
all right.
What's the most common objection you hear from brands when you're pitching them today?
We have retargeting covered. We already run retargeting campaigns, and then we have to educate them on a lot of what I discussed earlier around the value of multi-partner.
So what's the objection? That we already have this box checked.
I already have this covered. I don't need to do any more here. I already operate with Criteo or Performance Max, or my DSP. The trade desk is running retargeting campaigns, so I don't need to do any more here.
Okay. So if a brand's evaluating RTB House right now, ideally on Blurbs, what's the one question they should be asking you that most brands forget to ask?
I would say, what's in it for me, 2 or 3 years down the road. I think the problem with a lot of, kind of the way that we operate as an ecosystem is that it's so focused in on the near term performance. Like, how are you going to help me with my low funnel ROAS, as opposed to how can you help me from a full funnel standpoint, or how can you partner with me to drive better performance? And it's funny, even this conversation, we talk a lot about the competition between Criteo, but I want to talk about how I can help you with your whole entire performance stack, and maybe compete with your affiliate channel, or compete with Meta or Performance Max or another DSP for performance. And the only way to do that is over the course of years. I can't just prove that to you in 90 days. So what's in it for me in 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, and to be fair to RTB House, this conversation was absolutely focused on retargeting, but there's definitely a full funnel service there that some of the others provide, some don't. So do your homework on that, but it starts with performance, and so we wanted to focus there. Okay, last question. What do you know today that you wish you could tell your younger self when you started in this business? Let's go 2013.
Well, okay. I think 2013, huh? I think stay focused on the mission, and the challenge when you're in this business. And it's funny, you and I had to go through these trenches as well. Is make sure you understand who your ICP is, and don't deviate too much outside the box. And the reason why is you create a lot of noise for yourself. If you stay focused on what it is that the mission is, and so I'll give you an example. For me, I need to find people that value retargeting, and continue to build those relationships with those brands, those retailers, that type of customer, as opposed to trying to find somebody that seems sexy but doesn't value the channel. And that's a lesson that I've learned, time and time again, not only here at RTB House, but at Criteo, and at many of the other places that I've worked. You want to sell into somebody that values that channel. So don't deviate too much from the mission. You'll have that opportunity once you develop a business. But that's a lesson that I teach to my sellers all the time too.
Yeah, it's a good lesson. Stay focused. Otherwise, you're gonna end up burning a lot of calories that aren't well spent. Jason, it's great to have you on the show. Great to catch up as always. Look forward to having you back someday soon.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.
That's it for today's episode of the Martech Matrix, a Blurbs production. To see what's coming up next, visit themartechmatrix.com. And if you're looking for your next Martech solution, start your search at trustblurbs.com, where marketers discover vendors faster.